This summer, I did a survey of ash trees in Bellingham in preparation for and looking for signs of emerald ash borer. So I am a Whatcom Community College transfer student, and as of 3 weeks ago, I am a forest ecology and management student at Washington State University. I'm an insect and plant enthusiast, and my favorite tree is the coast redwood, which I mostly just put on this slide because I really wanted to include these two really cool pictures I got of coast redwoods this summer. Um, so the project itself, let's take a quick discussion about emerald ash borer. What is it? It is an invasive beetle whose native range was originally in Asia, but is now seen across the US and Canada. It arrived in the United States in the 1990s in Michigan and then began its march across the continent and was seen as far west as northwestern Oregon in 2022. Then it was seen in Vancouver, Canada in 2024, and in June of this year, seen in Surrey, Canada, which puts us in Bellingham in a situation of no longer if, but when we are going to be dealing with emerald ash borer. It is capable of its own movement. Can fly from tree to tree, but the reason it's been able to get across the continent so quickly is primarily through human assisted movement with things like moving firewood, nursery stock and ash trees, wood chips, wooden packaging, stuff like that. So if you're like me and you like bugs, you're looking at this picture of these two little guys and you're thinking, oh, but they're kind of cute, right? Like those big old eyes, they're in their little holes. How bad can they possibly be? Pretty bad. This is a photo of a street in Minnesota that has been totally decimated by emerald ash borer. All of these are ash trees that have been killed. Um, since it has been introduced to the United States and Canada, it has killed millions of ash trees. The adults feed on the foliage and lay their eggs in the cracks in the bark, which by themselves is not particularly damaging. However, those eggs hatch and the larvae burrow into the sapwood of the tree and disrupt critical tissues that transport water and nutrients through the tree, inevitably leading to tree death. So an emerald ash borer infestation can kill an immature tree in as little as 1 to 2 years, and a mature tree in 3 to 4 years. And usually by the time symptoms are showing, you already have an infestation of emerald ash borer. So the symptoms, what are they? When we're surveying for emerald ash borer, we're looking for basically two sets of symptoms. The first three are things that can be indicative of emerald ash borer, but can also be indicative of other problems with the tree. Over here, we have what is called epicormic shoots, which is where the tree is putting out new growth in response to damage higher up in the canopy. And this occurs at the base or on the lower trunk of the tree. Here we have a vertical split in the bark, and this happens when there is like structural damage beneath the bark that causes the bark to split open. And then we also have canopy dieback, which is the least useful when it comes to diagnosis because that can be caused by anything from seasonal drought to soil compaction. But if you have all three of these things together, then that can be a good sign to start looking for more specific signs of emerald ash borer itself. And these signs is we have our D-shaped exit holes, which is where the mature emerald ash borer beetles will exit the tree, leaving these little, very identifiable holes. They're small and difficult to find, but there aren't really any bugs in the Pacific Northwest that make that same kind of hole. So if you see something like that, especially multiple of them, that's a huge red flag. Directly beneath the bark, we have these kind of like serpentine insect galleries. You can see that as it's going along, it's getting bigger and bigger, which is where the larva is growing and then eventually exiting the tree. And then finally, we have increased woodpecker damage, which woodpeckers really like to eat these larvae. So if you have an ash tree that has a sudden uptick in woodpecker activity, you may be dealing with an emerald ash borer infestation. So we know what I've been surveying. Where did I do it? The city of Bellingham was very kind to share with me their tree inventory data. So I took that into QGIS and I isolated just the ash trees in Bellingham, which is that first image. There were 365 of them on record. And then that second image is the ash trees that I then isolated to be those over 10 inches in diameter. And that was my sample for survey. So then we have the stats from the iNaturalist project. We have 45 observations across 4 species, and 1 people. Not tracked by iNaturalist was 2 bee stings, a busted alternator, and a partridge in an ash tree. Um, so it was a really fun and interesting summer for us. The survey itself involved me going out to each of these trees and getting a closer look at them. I did both a basic health survey, which other people have talked about so far, where we're looking at things like dieback percentage and how nice the bark looks and the size of the tree. And then additionally looking for those symptoms that we just discussed of emerald ash borer. And I'm very happy to say that we did not find a single tree that had any definite signs of emerald ash borer. We did have some of the other symptoms that could be indicative of other problems. Of the 45 trees surveyed, I encountered 56% of which had epicormal shoots, 20% exhibited vertical splits in the bark, 67% had some amount of canopy dieback, and of the 45, 4 of them had been removed and were not able to be contributed to the data. These numbers are fairly consistent with what I had observed doing other projects on other species over in Bellingham over the summer. I will say that the presence of abnormal shoots did seem higher in the ash population than in others, but there can be multiple reasons for that. So what are we doing with this data? The 2 primary ways of managing an emerald ash borer infestation are either with inoculation of pesticides in a given tree or wholesale removal of a tree that is at risk. Looking at the data that we have, both from my survey and from the tree inventory, I would recommend that the inoculation efforts be focused in the Barkley neighborhood, which houses 192 out of 365 ash trees in Bellingham, 53%, over roughly a 10-block radius. So that's a really huge density of trees. And I inventoried most of the trees along this street here and can say that the bulk of them are large, healthy ash trees that are providing a lot of shade to a fairly well-traveled area. I had a lot of discussions with residents of Bellingham while working in that area about what I was doing and why. As far as removal of trees, as much as I hate to see a tree removed at all, I would say that the Maritime Heritage and Roosevelt Parks are the primary candidates for removal, given that they house all 56 Oregon ash trees, which are of particular favorite of emerald ash borer. Maritime Heritage Park especially, a lot of those trees are very small, 2 inches in diameter or less, which makes them relatively easier to replace than other larger trees. Roosevelt Park, they're a little bit bigger, but only this one on the end here was large enough to be included in my survey. A lot of the other ones in that area are medium in size, so perhaps a mix of inoculation and removal here, if possible, would be the best thing to do. But the city of Bellingham is not the only one who can help manage emerald ash borer in our area. The survey continues with your help, assuming that you're in Bellingham. If you're not, I'm sorry. Maybe you can come visit and look at some ash trees. It's a fun place to be. Because emerald ash borer infestations can take up to 2 years to show symptoms, even if I had been able to walk out and look at every single one of the 365 trees in Bellingham, there's no way that I would ever have been able to know for sure if we had already had contact with emerald ash borer. My survey was restricted to a small sample of publicly maintained ash trees of a certain diameter. And so those on private property or smaller trees were never going to be able to be part of the data set. Because of this, I decided that the next step should be to open up my iNaturalist project to the public and ask for community scientist help in creating a database of information that can be used in the future for tracking and management. And to do that, I basically just added some information to the iNaturalist project on, how is iNaturalist used? What are you looking for? What are the symptoms? All of that kind of stuff, so that people can now go out and contribute to the project themselves and, take a direct hand in taking care of our city's trees, which I think is really exciting, and I hope a lot of people do. This flyer in the corner that I made is going to be sent out to local schools and ecology interest groups, and hopefully some parks volunteers, the Walk a Million Trees project, people who care and are interested, and I hope to see a big response from it. So that's the project. As far as the internship as a whole, this was a really phenomenal experience that I felt very, very lucky to be part of. I learned a lot about experiment design, especially before doing this internship. All of my experience had been in the lab, which is a very, very different kind of design than it is working in the field. And it was a really great chance to get hands-on practice with forestry skills that, I'm going to be using in my daily life, in my career. Um, and now can say for sure that I love doing, which is great. If I could go back and restart the project from scratch, I think that I would reconsider the prioritization of trees and rather focus on at-risk neighborhoods as opposed to large trees across the city. So thank you so much to everybody who came to see the presentations today, to the U.S. Forest Service for providing funding for this project and for this internship, and to Joey and Zay and Zarina and Tim for all their help, and also to Bethany Wakema at Whatcom Community College Lab, who was the one who introduced me to this internship at all. I think we have a little bit of time if anybody has any questions.